Okay, so we're ready to get started on the second part of this session. Our session's on information systems, so we're looking at both information and big data and those kinds of things, as well as the integration of various IT systems. So we heard a lot about that from Brad when he was saying, you know, we have the technologies, we just don't have them quite right. And so we'll be looking at them from multiple perspectives. We're going to start off with Chris Skipworth, who ended our last session.
All right, thanks, Monica. So there is a reason why I'm back to back, and it's because I'm going to reiterate some of the things I talked about in the last talk. So in my previous talk, I presented a tool to aid validation of new diagnostic test candidates. Here in this talk, I actually present a method to use those test results to help healthcare providers make earlier diagnostic and treatment decisions. This research focuses on the clinical relevance of a thing called an endophenotype. And an endophenotype is a quantitative measurement that's correlated with disease via shared genetic causes. Quantitative measurements in medicine can include what's highlighted in yellow there, which can include blood tests, functional tests, tissue staining, serum measures, and imaging analysis, among many others. Through shared genetic causes, these endophenotypes can often precede the physical manifestation of disease, making them a potentially valuable tool for preventive care. Identification of candidate endophenotypes and their clinical utility is often stalled by the lack of genomic databases in individual research groups. Using a newly distributed public gene expression database through the National Institutes of Health, we have designed a machine learning interface to find genes of interest in cardiovascular disease patients. Here, we present the interface and its ability to identify and validate genes of interest. Going forward, we will use this information to associate genomic data with clinical tests in matching cardiovascular patient populations from a few hospitals here in the Boston area. From the sum of these analyses, we can generate candidate endophenotypes for cardiovascular disease, hopefully facilitating future diagnosis and treatment. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Chris. And now he's over with both of them. Good job. So Deborah's going to be talking next, Deborah Gregory from Finance. She also has to be rushing out of here to teach, so if you see her stand up, it's because she has a classroom of students waiting on her. Go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you all for being here. So, if any of you have been to a hospital recently, you've probably experienced how costs are being cut to the bone on the nursing floor. In the attempt to further reduce costs, systems engineers and business administrators are scrutinizing OR suites to find more efficient ways to manage patient flow. Essentially, how can you put more patients through the operating suite on any given day? By focusing on profit maximization, the biggest obstacle in being able to make significant and lasting changes is being overlooked, the culture of the OR suite itself. OR suites contain a complex web of relationships, hierarchies, and allegiances that is poorly understood by those on the outside, with perhaps the exception of writers of medical drama series, otherwise known as soap operas. We have approached this complex system on an integrative behavioral level by first understanding the primary and secondary goals of each internal stakeholder. Any final solution or overarching approach must take these priorities into account. We then address the issue of using standard cost accounting data due to its propensity to shift costs and to produce silo effects. We apply a variety of costing methods depending on the scope of the analysis. So in doing so, we're able to provide inputs into the scheduling program, that's supposed to all be there, into the scheduling program that's at the heart of the OR flow management. This program was originally developed using simulation data from real data we had collected from US hospitals where we had implemented the approach, and it's now at the point where the program is being used to provide OR suite management for hospitals using real-time data. What we end up with is an easy-to-understand visual display of how each internal stakeholder impacts all other stakeholders within the OR ecosystem, as well as the overall dollar costs. Part of the reason we were able to even implement any of this is because my co-author is a physician working in the OR, and so we had the trust of the people that we were working with. So in implementing the system in pilot hospitals in the US, we've had increased internal stakeholder satisfaction as well as increased cash flows from the OR suite. And we're currently working with some of the medical cities in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to help them achieve their goals in their medical program.
Thank you, Deborah. If you guys can pass down the clicker. Our next presenter is going to be Jennifer Shao from my own department, CIS, Computer Information Systems.
Thank you, Monica. Good afternoon. My topic of today is, I have to go to my title page. So which one? This one. All right. Deep learning-based topic identification and categorization, mining diabetes-related topics on Chinese health website. We know that diabetes is one of the most common chronic diseases in the world, and millions of people are diagnosed with diabetes. And same thing actually happens in China as well. And the number of people who are diagnosed with diabetes and the number of people who died of diabetes actually are on the rise from year to year. Well, fortunately, the web provides a lot of information, but in China, a lot of websites, although they provide information, the articles on these health topics are very much uncategorized and very unorganized. So we thought of ways to improve this kind of information, help information-seeking behavior of patients, their family members, and healthcare providers. So our research topic for this one is to effectively identify and categorize diabetes-related topics and contents on Chinese health-related websites. But there are some challenges. First of all, prior research on this kind of text categorization and topic identification is pretty much applied to English articles. And we know Chinese is quite a different language than English. And all the prior technologies and techniques cannot be applied directly to Chinese articles because of different, the two different characteristics of these two languages. And on the other hand, there's no widely accepted standards or lexicon, domain lexicon. Like in US, there's a domain lexicon for medical terms. It's called UMLS, which is Modified Medical Language System. So a lot of prior research uses that as the domain lexicon to help with our topic identification. Excuse me. But in China, there is no such medical domain lexicon. And there's another question here is that when we were trying to find the good technologies or techniques, we found no prior or little research in the literature to give us guidelines or ideas. So what we proposed is deep learning-based topic identification and categorization framework, which consists of 4 components: data collection, data pre-processing, and then in the center is the deep learning-based neural network. And at the end, we have the topic identification. We did some experiments, and it turned out that our approach actually outperformed most of the sort of benchmark systems. We use classification, and our accuracy and the other performance metrics actually are better than other benchmark systems. And we also analyzed the main causes for some kind of not so accurate results, and it turned out that some errors were because of our model, and some other errors were because of the source. The original source actually was not quite that good. That's pretty much what I want to present today.
Great, thanks, Jen. So we have quite the international panel here. We've now hit 3 continents, so let's see where we go next. So Kat, you're up next. She's coming from the Center of Integration and Science and Industry. Kat, Taquinho. I know I
Thank
did that
you.
wrong.
Hi, everybody. So, as many of you have experienced firsthand, data is everywhere, and it's growing in size and complexity. Data resources are available, but the data itself is very messy, and the available software does not follow a one-size-fits-all model. In addition to finding the right data and software, another challenge collaborative teams face is maintaining version control and allowing access by all team members. The Center for Integration of Science and Industry is building a big data infrastructure for managing its core biopharmaceutical data, which includes FDA-approved drugs, NIH grants and patents, as well as clinical trials data, and all the algorithms that are used to analyze it. Our largest and most prominent database is PubMed, which contains 24 million scientific articles, and we extract titles, abstracts, authors, affiliations, publication years, and other metadata, which in total, the total size of which is 122 gigabytes. We use that to study how scientific terminology trends through time and relate word usage patterns to technological innovation. Eventually, we will store and efficiently process our large collection of linked data sets on the cloud, as well as the text mining experiments. This kind of organizational platform will enable us to link approved FDA products and their labels, which contain therapeutic use and therapeutic target information, and the basic scientific publications of the research targets. Come to my poster and you can learn more about what we do, and as well as learn about how we're migrating away from spreadsheets that are continuing to grow out of control. Thank you.
Love to hear that being a database professor, so that's wonderful. So our next up is Mystica Alexander. She's from the Law, Taxation, and Financial Planning Department, and she'll be talking about her work.
Good afternoon. We'll begin with a simple example. Let's suppose that you're a 40-year-old woman and you have just been diagnosed with high cholesterol. Now, if you're like most computer users, you're going to log onto your computer and you're going to start Googling your health issues. So you may search women and high cholesterol, cholesterol-lowering drugs, etc. You get the idea. Now, since you are conducting health-related searches that have the potential to be traced back specifically to you, perhaps you're wondering whether HIPAA provides any protection. And the simple answer is no. Now, as our research has developed, we are gravitating toward the conclusion that this lack of privacy protection for such health searches may in fact violate the spirit, if not the letter, of HIPAA. Let's talk about the technology for a bit. First-party trackers, such as cookies, are often considered benign text files that are placed onto a user's computer to facilitate information transfers. For example, keeping track of your items in your online shopping cart. In contrast, third-party trackers are designed to gather information across internet domains. And although third-party tracking has been fragmented and messy, things like data mining and data warehousing can improve the quality of this tracking data by connecting it to additional information gathered about you, such as your IP address, your name, your location, and even your associations. So, the next time you log onto your computer, does this mean that you are now going to start receiving pop-up ads for cholesterol-lowering drugs? Well, actually, you'll find that often the answer is no. But that limitation does not arise from any legal restrictions. It arises instead, and I am so sorry, I spent so much time on these slides too. So that restriction arises instead from Google's privacy policy. And Google's policy states that the company will not share health-related information unless a user affirmatively opts in to such actions. Now, call us skeptics, but we are not convinced that simply relying on Google's promises is enough. So, now back to our example. As part of your plan to improve your health, your doctor has prescribed Lipitor. So you search GoodRx for the best price on Lipitor. Now, interestingly, as we searched Lipitor on GoodRx, we received a pop-up ad for Januvia, a diabetes drug. So we were curious about this and found that information on Januvia states that diabetes may actually have the adverse effect of reducing good cholesterol. So clearly, on some level, connections are being made to our search query activity. So what are the economic and legal implications of this tracking and aggregation of our healthcare queries? That is a question that we are seeking to address through our empirical research, and David and I would be happy to talk more about this at the poster session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kuh. That is very cool. Makes me wonder every time I touch my computer, huh? Alina Kirk is going to be speaking next from IPM, Information Process and Management Department.
Thank you. So I'm going to speak today about a project on a real-world awareness system in the pharmaceutical value chain. This is a project that I became interested in based on previous research that I've done in the healthcare sector about tracking and tracing and using technology for this purpose in pharmaceutical supply chains. As we were doing that, we discovered that the literature actually came up with this concept of real-world awareness, which is a system that scans environments, collects real-time information, and responds to that information efficiently and effectively. And this includes both real-time identification of events, but also anticipation of events that might happen in the future. So it's useful for a company to actually know if their competitors are introducing a new drug or they're making changes to their strategy, because then the company can be proactive in adapting to those changes. So this real-world awareness system are actually very useful for companies. They can reduce problems with information capture, event forecasting, and company responses, and they enable a company to actually aggregate all the information in one place that's easily accessible. So my focus in this project was actually on the methodology part, and so we wanted to build an artifact, a prototype that would demonstrate how a real-world awareness system would operate, and then show it to users. So this is a design science approach where you try to evaluate the artifact that you're building against the real world and try to understand its effectiveness, and also see if users react to it. That would give you ideas about how to improve the artifact further. So this is what it looks like. It's actually a world map with events that pop up. If you have a competitor that introduces a new drug, you're going to get an alert. If a regulatory agency in a certain country approves a generic drug, you're going to get an alert. So all the information you collect can be mapped. So depending on your area of focus, you can focus on a specific area, geographic area, or just view the entire world at a time. So what we have done through the evaluation process was to develop the taxonomy of the types of information objects that companies need to focus on. So there are informal information pieces. This can come from customers, from R&D, from trade shows. Then there are official objects of perception if a competitor enters a market, or if there's a price change, if there's a regulation change. There are artifacts like new studies that could eventually lead to new drug introduction. And there are also organizational structures, the roles, the tasks, and knowledge, both internal and external in the organization. So we tested this with one company so far, so this is still research in progress, but through the testing process, we found out that this type of system is actually very valuable for collecting information, both from collaboration partners, but also information about competitors, detecting market entry, detecting new drug development, and then the visualization of the events of the world map was also one of the things that the test revealed as a very valuable outcome of the system. So I'll have to teach afterwards, so I won't be able to stay for too long and talk about the poster, but you can email me. I'm happy to talk about it more.
Great, thank you so much, Alina. So nice to see so many of the things that Brad brought up coming up here, the data visualization, trying to get the idea of how do we actually present all this data so that people can digest it. Our next person up is David Merengue, also from the Information and Process Management Department.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So our research examines the role that emotions play in the adoption of electronic medical records, or EMRs, within the context of large healthcare organizations. We look at emotions because emotions are a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they're important for creating and sustaining work motivation in information system projects, but on the other hand, they also serve as impediments to rational control of these projects. So our research examines how this tension is managed during an EMR implementation. And to accomplish this, what we do is we examine the discursive or speech-related strategies that are employed in controlling or managing instances of emotional conflict or dissonance within these implementation efforts. So our specific research question is, how is emotional conflict in a complex CMR implementation discursively controlled? To answer this question, we borrow from argument theory and use two main theoretical lenses to analyze project discourse. The first theoretical lens is the dialectical approach to argumentation, which attempts to manage emotional conflict by limiting the discourse or the argumentation to rational or logical constructs. So it attempts to subdue or limit emotional conflict by focusing attention on the cold, hard facts of the project. So it's based on the assumption that emotions are difficult, if not impossible, to control. The second theoretical lens that we use is rhetorical argumentation, which attempts to mitigate emotional conflict through the use of persuasive discourse. It's based on the assumption that emotions can be influenced by deliberate emotional acts of speech. So some of our initial preliminary findings are that in the projects that we've looked at, despite evidence of latent or emotional conflict in early stages of EMR implementations, our early argument structures do not acknowledge or include emotional considerations in their decision-making process. So the emphasis is on the rational aspects of the project. Emotion only becomes salient in times of heightened emotional conflict, so it's ignored until it reaches a critical point where there's an emotional insurgency. And then there's evidence that because of the way the discourse is structured early on, the project manager is easily blindsided by these emotional flare-ups because initially the projects are designed to kind of limit or obscure the emotional side of the project. And then we find also that at the end, when trying to resolve these emotional tensions, it's really difficult because of the emotional distance that's created by those early discourse structures. So in the end, in the project that I looked at, the conflict was resolved by administrative or authoritative fiat and not one of those discursive-based resolution strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
All right, next we'll have Monica Garfield from Computer Information Systems, and she'll be our last speaker of the panel.
Yeah, so I decided not to introduce myself. So it was great to be able to hear what David had to say because we also found some interesting observations about the way emotions impact the rhetoric or the way people interact using technology and medicine. So our work, and when I say our work, it's myself and Janice Gogan, who's here in the audience. We've been working in the area of telemedicine for about 10 years now, and separately probably for a total of 20 or 30 years. So when we looked at telemedicine back in the 90s, it was still having some technical problems. But by this point in time, technology is not the problem. The technology is there. We are fine with the technology. The problem is we're not using it. And the question is, why aren't we using it? And so we started to look at this by going out and talking to a series of individuals across multiple groups. So we looked at telestroke. We have some of the best telestroke in the world here in Boston. We looked at telepsychiatry, and we looked at telepediatrics, trying to understand in what environment do people use technologies that will enable them to do telecommunications for healthcare. For us, that would be telemedicine. And when don't they? And one of the arising themes we saw time and time again was trust. If I trust you, I'm more likely to use the technology. So our first thought was, okay, well, what does this interpersonal trust mean? And so as we looked at that, the interpersonal trust we're talking about is for the full healthcare team. So that would be the local physician, the hub physician, which is typically the specialist, the patient, and the patient support group, which is oftentimes the family members. And as we saw this, we saw that having that visual contact really was important. So when we took to, it used to be that we just call people on the phone and say, okay, Dr. So-and-so, what do you think? And they're finding now that by using that visual stimuli, by actually talking on video, we're having a couple things happen. One is it's increasing the trust between the caretaking group. And the other thing we're finding is that continuity of care is a little bit better. Because when we transfer these extremely ill people, when they get to the new environment, they already have some of the information about those individuals coming in that they would not have had it just been over the phone or through a fax. As well as being able to walk into a department and know that doctor already. So they're able to actually hit the ground running a lot faster. Then we said, okay, we know that trusting between individuals is very important, but how do we trust a system? How does that change the way I trust you? So what we found with the systems themselves, trying to get you to actually trust the software, two big things came up. And those were situational normalcy and representational fidelity. What that means in regular English is, does it look like stuff that I'm used to looking at? And does it work the way I'm used to working? So if I'm taking data and modifying the way I present it to somebody, it's no longer representing what I think I should be seeing. So the clarity that we see things, the ability to be able to get information in the standard format, really important. And then lastly, it's situational normalcy, which is probably the biggest thing we're running into with telemedicine. It's like I said, we have the technology. Then of course we have the big problems, that's licensure and reimbursement. But besides that, why are people not using it? And it's not in their routine. It hasn't been routinized. They have habits that haven't been broken yet. So until they have situational normalcy, they don't actually engage in the use of it. And how do you do that? Well, there are lots of different strategies. And if you want to talk about that, you can come and talk to me in my poster. But we find 5 or 6 different ways that you can really improve that to gain the kind of insight we'd like to use with telemedicine. Thanks.
Would anybody like to ask any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Martha.